The road started at a broken stoplight and ended, theoretically, somewhere on the other side of what used to be Crestfall County. Nobody had confirmed the other side existed. That was, in a manner of speaking, part of the test. Examiner Voss 7 clicked his pen twice before climbing into the passenger seat of Vehicle Unit Provisional 4. A rust-stripped ground crawler with a cracked windscreen, repaired using 3 layers of emergency wrap and 1 strip of pre-war duct tape that someone had written the word optimism on in black marker. He didn't smile. He hadn't smiled during the orientation briefing. He hadn't smiled during the pre-examination paperwork, which had taken 40 minutes, because the candidate, a young human named Dara Osei, had filled in the wrong box for dominant driving appendage and had to start the form over. He said, "Contribuyent Osei, are you prepared to begin your assessment?" Dara stared through the windscreen at the wasteland. The ash-gray flats of what had been a motorway interchange stretched out ahead, punctuated by wrecks that had been there so long they had begun to look geological. 2 moons hung low in the sky, one the original, one the crystallized remnant of a Kethor orbital platform that the conclave had detonated over the northern hemisphere on the 3rd day of the Silence War, 17 years ago. It caught the sunrise in a way that was beautiful if you didn't know what it was. "Ready," she said. She gripped the wheel at 10 and 2, the way the manual specified. Voss 7 made a note on his clipboard. He had already made 4 notes. She hadn't moved the vehicle yet. The thing about the Kethur, and this was not covered in the Galactic Council's official literature, which tended toward the word intervention and away from the word occupation, was that they had arrived with a philosophy, a doctrine, order through dissolution, meaning, if the existing structures of a civilization are unsound, remove them, and something purer will emerge from the ruins. They had applied this doctrine to 17 human population centers before the conclave grew fractious, and the advance forces stopped receiving supply ships, and the orbital platforms became, one by one, silent or destroyed. The Kethur withdrew. They called it a strategic repositioning. Everyone else called it a retreat, whispered, in the years that followed, with something that felt cautiously like pride. What remained was this: ash flats ruined geography. Approximately 400,000 human survivors in what the Relief Accord officially designated as the reconstitution zone, living in clusters of varying stability. And, in the center of it all, a converted water treatment facility that housed the last functioning office of the Department of Vehicle Certification, staffed by 3 remaining examiners and 1 administrative coordinator, and issuing driving licenses to anyone who could pass the test. People thought that was funny. Before they needed one, because the roads were the arteries now. Medicine moved by vehicle, food moved by vehicle, information, generators, filtration equipment, seed stock, medicine again. Everything moved, and it moved on the roads. And the roads were contested by salvage gangs, who had decided that the collapse of governance meant the collapse of limits, and the only way to move anything important was to move it fast, and move it with someone who knew what they were doing behind the wheel. You could argue about whether a driving license meant anything in the abstract. You could not argue about it when a caravan full of antibiotics needed to reach Settlement K9 before the fever took the children's ward. "Contribuyent Osei," said Voss 7. "You'll note I've placed a waypoint marker on the dash display. You are to navigate to the marker via the safest available route, adhering to all operational guidelines in the Reconstitution Zone Driving Manual, 3rd edition, amended. Do you have any questions before we begin? Is the route going to take us near the bleach flats?" Voss 7 consulted his clipboard. "It may pass within 2 kilometers of the eastern edge. And you know the pale kin operate out there. I am aware of current gang activity in the assessment zone." Dara looked at him. He was alien-built, Voss 7, a municipal AI installed in a humanoid chassis that the department had scavenged from a Keth-Ur administrative drone and reprogrammed with considerable ingenuity by the department's technical coordinator, a 73-year-old woman named Bertice, who called him "my guy" with genuine affection. His face was calibrated for neutral. It had one expression, and that expression was assessment. "Okay," said Dara. She put the vehicle in drive. She had grown up in the east sectors, where the ash was thicker and the nights were cold, in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Her mother had driven supply convoys until she couldn't anymore. Her brother Kofi ran a relay circuit between the outer settlements with a half-repaired APC and a dog that barked at anything that moved. She had failed this test twice before. The first time, she'd overcorrected on the broken overpass and scraped the guardrail. 2 fault points. Not a fail in itself, but she'd panicked and stalled the engine at the worst possible moment, which was when a pale-kin outrider came down the ramp, and she'd sat there frozen, while Voss 7 had applied the emergency override with the calm of a man who was not technically a man. Second time she'd lost points for following distance, and then more points for an unlicensed merge, and then she'd been failed outright for pulling a shear shredder maneuver on the connector road, which was in the manual under prohibited techniques, unless you were licensed for level 4 evasive driving, which required passing the basic test first, which she had not done, which was why she was here. Third time, she drove. The route took them west on the old commercial strip, past the facades of buildings that still had signage on them. Restaurants and pharmacies, and a gym whose window had been boarded up with the gym's own promotional banner. Stronger every day, faded now to the color of old teeth. She maintained proper speed. She checked her mirrors at the intervals the manual specified. At a 4-way ruin, she stopped at the vestigial stop sign, even though there was no cross-traffic, and Voss 7 made a note. Good procedure, he said. It was the most praise the manual permitted him during a live assessment. She allowed herself exactly nothing in response. Not a smile, not a breath. Her hands at 10 and 2. The bleach flats came to view as she turned south on the Route 7 spur, a pale expanse of alkalized earth that glittered in the morning light like something that had been trying to become salt and hadn't quite managed it. The pale kin had taken their name from it. They'd been an ordinary salvage crew once. 2 years back, before the supply drops stopped and the eastern water processors failed. And something had broken in the people who lived out there. They weren't ideological. That, in a way, made them worse. Contingent OC, said Voss 7. I'm noting you have reduced speed below the minimum safe transit velocity. I'm watching the ridge. The assessment does not include threat assessment. With respect, said Dara, the assessment is on roads where threats exist. If I drive at minimum safe transit velocity past a ridge where I know. Contingent OC. I'm watching the ridge, she said again quietly. He made a note. She drove. The ridge stayed still. A burned-out hauler chassis sat at the edge of the flats like a monument to an argument that had been settled in the worst way. Dara kept her eyes moving. Ridge, road, mirrors, ridge. The way her mother had taught her, before her mother's hands had stopped working. The way Kofi had drilled into her on late nights in the maintenance bay, crouching beside the wheel well with a flashlight in his teeth, saying, "You don't watch one thing out here. You watch everything. You watch everything until it becomes automatic. Until watching costs you nothing." She saw the outrider before it fully cleared the ridge. It came down the slope at speed, a stripped-down interceptor with the windscreen removed and 2 figures standing in the bed. And the driver was good. Not excellent, she noted. Not trained, but good. And it was coming in at an angle that would put it across her path in approximately 4 seconds. She didn't brake. She didn't floor it. She did what the Level 2 evasive section described as a controlled velocity adjustment, combined with lateral repositioning. She dropped 2 gear positions, bled speed without stopping, and moved to the road's outer edge, giving the interceptor its line while simultaneously taking the only ground-level depression in the road surface and using it to get her vehicle's profile below the sight line of the figures in the bed. 3 seconds of exposure. 2. The interceptor crossed behind her. Voss 7's pen was moving. She didn't look. The waypoint was 6 kilometers ahead. The pale kin didn't pursue. They were watching the road, she knew. Watching to see if she'd run. Watching to see if she'd stop. Watching for anything that looked like either fear or aggression. Because both of those were invitations. She had given them a vehicle, maintaining speed and direction and taking up its lane, which was the body language of someone going somewhere. And people going somewhere on these roads were rarely worth the trouble. She breathed out slowly. That was a controlled velocity adjustment, she said. I observed it, said Voss 7. I didn't brake. I noted that. She waited. He didn't volunteer what the note said. They drove through the middle section in silence. The road here had been partially repaved by the Settlement Road Authority in the 2nd year after the withdrawal, when people had started to believe the roads might matter again. It showed. Not in quality, the patches were rough and the grades were wrong, but in the fact that it had been done at all, which meant people were around to do it. which meant people had decided the future was worth the effort of laying stone. Dara found she drove better on this stretch. There was something about evidence of human effort that steadied her hands. The second incident came at the underpass. She saw the block while she still had stopping distance. Two vehicles arranged across the road at angles not quite touching. A gap between them just wide enough to look like an invitation. Two figures on foot standing to the sides. The pale kin again, or affiliated. Same pale chalk markings on the bodywork, same slouch that tried to look like ease. There is an obstruction, said Voss 7. Yes, said Dara. The manual provides 3 certified responses to a road obstruction. Controlled stop, certified alternate route, or, I know what it says. She was slowing now, reading the gap, reading the figures. The figures were watching her slow and reading her right back. And the whole thing had the quality of a conversation happening below the level of words. Here was what she knew. The gap between the vehicles was a trap, not a passage. You could fit through it, probably, and then you couldn't get out the other side, because there'd be a third vehicle hidden under the overpass. And the figures on foot would close behind you. And that was that. Here was what she also knew. There was a gully to the right, 3 meters of drop, sandy bottom, that a vehicle could theoretically descend and run for 80 meters before picking up the service road that rejoined the route 200 meters past the blockade. She had looked at this underpass on the assessment maps. She had looked at all the underpasses. Alternate route, she said. She turned right. There is no designated alternate route at this junction, said Voss 7. I'm creating one. The gully ate the front wheels first. The vehicle lurched, and the emergency wrap on the windscreen flexed with a sound like a complaint, and for one long second the angle was steep enough that Dara felt gravity testing its options. Then the rear wheels came down, and they were on the sandy floor, and she kept them moving. Kept moving. Because stopping was losing, and she ran the gully with both hands full, and her whole attention on the surface ahead, reading the ground the way Kofi had taught her to read it, not as obstacle but as information, not as problem but as route. The service road came up. She took the incline at the only angle that wouldn't spin the tires, and they came back up onto sealed surface with a bang and a shudder, and she was through. In the mirror, the blockade receded. The figures on foot were still watching. She checked her speed. She adjusted her mirrors. She put her hands back at 10 and 2. That, said Voss 7 carefully, was an undesignated route deviation. I have the manual memorized, said Dara. Chapter 7. Section 4. In the event of a road obstruction presenting clear threat indicators, a candidate may exercise operational judgment to pursue safety via alternate passage, provided the passage is executed within vehicle capability and without reckless endangerment. A long pause. You memorized Chapter 7. I memorized all of it. I failed twice. I wasn't going to fail because something I could have known. Voss 7 made a note. She couldn't read his expression. It was still the single expression of assessment. But something in the quality of the note seemed different. She didn't know if that was real or wishful. The waypoint was 2 kilometers ahead. The road opened up here, broadened into what had been a regional junction, and the sky came with it. Enormous and pale blue over the ash-gray plain, and in the distance the water treatment facility stood against it with its improvised antenna array and its painted sign, Department of Vehicle Certification, and below that in smaller letters, still open, and the sight of it did something to Dara's chest that she hadn't expected. Not relief, something closer to recognition. It was still there, it was still running. 3 people and an AI in a reprogrammed drone chassis and an administrative coordinator named Bertice who put the word optimism on the repair tape. Still here, still giving tests, because as long as you were giving tests, as long as the tests meant something, as long as a license was a real thing that a driver earned by demonstrating real competence, then the roads were real, and the routes were real, and the supply convoys and the medicine and the seed stock were all real. And the future was a thing you could navigate to rather than a rumor. She pulled to a stop at the waypoint. She put the vehicle in park. She removed her hands from the wheel and placed them in her lap and looked straight ahead, the way the manual specified. End of assessment route, she said. Voss 7 was writing. He wrote for a long time. She watched the antenna array rotating slowly against the blue sky and didn't watch him write because she had done what she had done and the assessment was what it was. He clicked his pen once. Contingent OC, he said. During this assessment, I observed the following. Appropriate stop procedure at a non-functional intersection. Correct mirror discipline throughout. 1 speed reduction below minimum transit velocity at the Bleach Flats approach, for which I recorded a notation. He paused. I am choosing not to record it as a fault. She didn't say anything. I observed a controlled velocity adjustment under direct threat approach that demonstrated anticipatory hazard reading consistent with advanced operational judgment. I observed an undesignated route deviation at the eastern underpass that I have assessed as falling within the Chapter 7, Section 4 operational exception. He stopped writing. I have also observed that you cited the relevant section of the manual without prompting. I studied. Yes, you did. He put the clipboard on the dash. On it was the assessment form, and at the bottom, in the small box that said examiner determination, he had written, in his precise and mechanical hand, competent to drive. Dara looked at it for a moment. That's it, she said. That is the determination, yes. No. She stopped, started again. I just want to know. All of that. The ridge, the flats, the blockade, the gully. Was that just roads, or was that the test? Voss 7 considered the question with the careful, unhurried quality he brought to everything. The assessment, he said finally, is conducted on the roads as they are. Not the roads as they were, or as they might become. The roads as they are today in the reconstitution zone. He picked up the clipboard and held it with both hands. The manual describes the competencies required. The roads provide the conditions. A candidate who knows the manual, and who can apply that knowledge under the conditions the roads actually provide. He stopped. That candidate, he said, is competent to drive. She nodded. She was not going to cry. She had a rule about that. When does the license come through? Administrative processing takes approximately 48 hours. Bertis will contact you via the settlement relay. Dara started the vehicle and drove them back toward the facility through the clear morning, along the roughly repaired road with its 2 steep grades and its evidence of human effort, and the 2 moons hung above the horizon, and the ash plains caught the light, and the settlement relay towers stood in the distance like patient, waiting things, and she drove with her hands at 10 and 2, and her eyes moving. Ridge, road, mirrors, ahead, and the vehicle moved forward, the way things still managed to move forward here, through knowledge and stubbornness and a refusal to interpret the obstruction as the end of the route. Behind them, somewhere on the Bleach Flats, the pale kin watched the road. They were always watching. That was all right. You drove anyway. That was, in the end, the whole of the manual. Inside the facility, Bertis was already printing the paperwork, and the antenna was still rotating. And on the shelf above the main desk there were 37 laminated licenses in a row. Every candidate who had passed since the withdrawal, with photographs and names, and the seal of the department in the bottom corner. Each one was a small and stubborn fact about a human being who had looked at the roads as they were, and the conditions as they were, and the future as it might be, and had decided to learn what was required. Dara Osi's would be the 38th. She parked the vehicle. She climbed out. She stood for a moment in the clear air with the mountains away to the west, still white at the peaks from a winter that had come in wrong this year, and breathed. Voss 7 climbed out on his side and walked toward the facility entrance without comment. At the door he paused. Contidient Osi, he said, without turning. Yeah. You watched the ridge when I told you not to. I did. You were correct to watch the ridge. He went inside. The door closed behind him. The antenna turned. The road stretched away in 2 directions, broken and patched and rough and real. And somewhere on it right now, Kofi was making his relay run in his half-repaired APC with his barking dog. On convoys were moving with medicine and seed and water, and the people who drove them were doing it with the specific and irreplaceable competence of people who had studied the manual and who knew the roads, and who kept their hands at 10 and 2, and their eyes on everything at once. Dara looked at the road for a long moment. Then she went inside to fill out the paperwork.